The warning signals screamed through space, cutting through the peaceful silence of the Galactic Council headquarters like a knife through butter. Static filled the air as desperate voices begged for help from the far edge of the galaxy. The Caldari colony was dying, and everyone knew it. Admiral Trelak, a tall alien with silver scales and 4 arms, watched the battle reports flood in on his screens. His heart sank with each update. The Vorth Horde had found another victim. These weren't just raiders or pirates, they were destroyers. Entire civilizations vanished when the Vorth came calling. They burned planets until nothing lived, then moved on to find fresh prey. The Caldari were peaceful farmers and artists. Their weapons were farming tools. Their ships carried seeds and paintings, not missiles and armor. Against the Vorth war machine, they might as well have been throwing flowers at a hurricane. How long do they have? Trelak asked his aide, though. He already knew. The answer would break his heart. 12 hours, maybe 14, if they hide in the deep caves, came the reply. Our closest battle fleet is 6 days away at maximum speed. Trelak's claws scraped against his command chair. 6 days. The Caldari would be dead and forgotten long before help arrived. Their children, their elders, their precious art, all of it would become ash floating in space. The command center fell silent except for the crackling distress signals. 200 species had come together to form the Galactic Council, united in peace and cooperation. They had built a civilization based on reason and wisdom. But sometimes, reason wasn't enough. Counselor Vexera, an elderly diplomat with flowing tentacles instead of hair, stepped forward. Her voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking the words might summon demons from the void. There is one option we haven't considered: the humans. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Officers looked at each other with wide eyes. Some actually stepped backward. The word human was spoken in the same tone other species might use for plague or nightmare. Humans, the Deathworlders. Those terrifying bipeds from a world so dangerous that simply surviving childhood there turned someone into a walking weapon. Earth wasn't just a harsh planet. It was actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. Storms that could level cities. Predators with teeth longer than swords. Diseases that could wipe out entire populations. And somehow, humans thrived. There, the Council had discovered humanity 50 years ago. First contact had been friendly enough, until they saw how humans fought, while civilized species conducted war like a chess match. Careful, calculated, minimal casualties. Humans waged war like a force of nature. They charged into battle laughing. They turned their own injuries into weapons. They fought hardest, when things looked most hopeless. It wasn't just their tactics that frightened other species. It was their complete disregard for what everyone else considered impossible. Human ships regularly violated safety protocols that other species wouldn't dare break. Human soldiers treated vacuum exposure like a minor inconvenience. Human engineers built weapons that should have blown up in their faces, except somehow they worked perfectly. The Council had tried to integrate humans into galactic civilization. They offered them trade deals, technology exchanges, cultural programs. The humans were polite, but kept building bigger guns. When asked why they needed such powerful weapons in a time of peace, they would smile and say, "You never know what's coming next." That attitude terrified the Council. Here were beings who prepared for wars that hadn't started yet, who assumed that peace was just the quiet time between battles. So they made a decision that seemed wise at the time. They quarantined humanity to the outer rim of the galaxy, far from civilized space. We gave them 5 star systems and told them to stay there, they said, for everyone's safety. Now, as Trelak stared at the reports of Caldari children crying for help, that decision felt like the height of foolishness. Admiral Trelak's hands shook as he reached for the communication controls. He had spent decades crafting his reputation as a careful, thoughtful leader. He made decisions based on logic and protocol. He followed the rules that kept galactic civilization peaceful and orderly, but rules meant nothing to dead children. The transmission went out on the emergency frequency, racing across space toward the quarantine zone where humanity waited. It was a simple message, encoded with the Council's highest priority signals. Help us. We're sorry. We need you. At the edge of known space, Admiral James Mitchell sat in his captain's chair aboard the UES Defiant. The ship was ugly by galactic standards. Too many weapons, too much armor, engines that burned too hot. But it was home. Mitchell was reading casualty reports from training exercises when the Council's message arrived. His weathered face, marked by scars from a dozen battles, slowly broke into a grim smile. The same aliens who had called humans too dangerous for civilized company were now begging for help. He stood up and walked to the center of his bridge. Around him, his crew looked up from their stations. These were Deathworlders, humans, who had volunteered to serve at the galaxy's edge, protecting species that feared them. All ships, this is Admiral Mitchell. He broadcast to the Third Human Fleet. His voice carried across 50 warships, reaching thousands of human soldiers, who had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. We've got a colony under siege, and less than 2 days to get there. The Fourth Horde thinks they can wipe out innocent people, while we're stuck out here in quarantine. Time to show these aliens what Deathworlders can really do. The response was immediate. Ship after ship reported, ready for battle. Engines roared to life. Weapons powered up. The human fleet began to move, heading toward a battle that would either save a civilization or destroy everything they had worked for. The galaxy was about to remember why it had feared humanity in the first place. The U.S. Thunderbolt screamed through hyperspace like a bullet fired from the gods themselves. Inside the engineering bay, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks felt every bolt and rivet in the ship groaning under impossible stress. The metal walls around her were actually bending from the forces they were enduring. This wasn't flying. This was controlled falling through the fabric of reality. Her console looked like a Christmas tree made of warning lights. Every single safety system was flashing red. The reactor temperature gauges had climbed so high, they were off the charts. Normal protocol would have demanded an immediate shutdown, but normal protocol wouldn't save the Caldari colony. Ma'am, we're pushing the reactors at 140% capacity. Ensign Tommy Rivers shouted over the howling of overstressed engines. Sweat poured down his face as he fought to keep the power systems from exploding. His hands flew across the controls, making micro-adjustments that kept them alive second by second. One wrong calculation, and we'll tear apart in hyperspace. Brooks looked at the readings and felt her stomach drop. They were doing things to their ship that should have been impossible. The hyperspace field around them was unstable, crackling, with energy that could vaporize them instantly if it collapsed wrong. But somehow, it was working. Then we better not make any wrong calculations, Rivers, she said with a grim smile that didn't reach her eyes. Bypass safeties on decks 7 through 12 and reroute all non-essential power to the jump drive. Cut life support to the cargo bays if you have to. Ma'am, that's against every regulation in the book. Rivers, we threw the book out the airlock. The moment we started this run, do it. Around them, the ship shuddered like a living thing in pain. The hull was actually flexing as they pushed through hyperspace at speeds that physics said should have liquefied them all. But humans had never been good at accepting what physics said was impossible. Across the fleet, 50 other human ships were performing the same miracle of engineering madness. On the EU's Wolverine, Chief Engineer Mark Davis had torn apart half his engine room to build modifications that existed only in his head. His crew worked like demons, welding connections, while sparks flew around them, breathing recycled air thick with metal fumes. Chief, the jump coils are overheating, called out Petty Officer Rachel Stone, her uniform soaked with sweat and coolant. Then dumped the heat into the water recyclers. Davis snapped back, not looking up from the fusion core he was personally rewiring. We'll drink warm water for a week if it means getting there in time. These weren't the careful, methodical repairs that alien species would perform. This was human engineering, fast, dirty, and somehow always working when it mattered most. They were pulling micro-jumps through gravitational fields that should have crushed their ships flat. They were skipping across space-time like stones on water, each jump a calculated risk that could either save time or destroy them completely. The calculations alone would have taken alien computers days to process safely. Human navigators were doing them in their heads, trusting instinct and experience over careful analysis. They were riding the edge of disaster and loving every terrifying second of it. Navigator Beth Collins plotted their course through her ship's main computer while simultaneously running backup calculations on her personal tablet. If we thread between these two black holes and use their gravity to slingshot forward, we can cut another 6 hours off our time, she announced to her captain. That maneuver has never been attempted by anyone, her captain replied. Good thing we're not just anyone then, sir. Meanwhile, in the distant Epsilon sector, War Leader Krexith stared at his sensors with growing confusion and rage. The Vorth were masters of war, conquerors, who had crushed 1,000 civilizations. Their technology was proven in countless battles. Their sensors were the most accurate in known space. But what they were showing him made no sense. These readings must be an error, he growled to his bridge crew, his massive claws scraping against his command throne. The Vorth were built like walking tanks 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, with strength that could crush steel. No ship can maintain those acceleration rates without tearing itself apart. His science officer, a smaller Vorth with distinctive red markings, checked the readings again. War Leader, I have confirmed the data through 3 separate sensor networks. Something is approaching at impossible velocities. The energy signatures suggest a fleet of at least 40 vessels, Krexith snarled. The nearest Galactic Council fleet was 6 days away, at maximum safe speed. He had confirmed this before beginning his attack on the Caldari colony. No one else in this sector had military capabilities worth mentioning. What species operates in this region? He demanded. Only the Caldari themselves, War Leader, and they possess no fleet capable of these readings. The War Leader studied the tactical display with growing unease. His species had conquered half the galaxy through careful planning and overwhelming force. They never attacked without knowing exactly what opposition they faced. The unknown was dangerous, and this was very unknown indeed. Perhaps it is a Galactic Council scout force attempting some new technology, suggested another officer. Impossible, Krexith rumbled. Council ships are built for safety and comfort. They would never risk such extreme maneuvers. Their captains would rather die than violate safety protocols. But the sensors didn't lie. Something was coming toward them through hyperspace, moving at speeds that should have killed everyone aboard those ships. The energy readings suggested massive reactors running far beyond safe limits. The hyperspace distortions looked like someone was literally tearing holes in reality to get here faster. Time until arrival? Krexith asked, though he dreaded the answer. At current velocity. 8 hours, War Leader. 8 hours. The Vorth commander felt a chill run through his armored hide. His intelligence reports had guaranteed at least 5 days before any possible rescue attempt could reach the Caldari. This changed everything. Increase bombardment of the colony, he ordered. I want this planet reduced to ash before whatever's coming gets here. But deep in his warrior's heart, Krexith felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Uncertainty. Whoever was coming was willing to risk everything to get here. And in his experience, beings desperate enough to attempt the impossible were the most dangerous enemies of all. The human fleet continued its mad dash through hyperspace, their ships screaming toward a battle that would either save an innocent species or destroy everything they held dear. Time was running out, but they were moving faster than time itself. Carried forward by engineering miracles and pure human stubbornness, the galaxy was about to discover that, when humans said they were coming to help, physics itself got out of the way. Reality tore open like a wound in space itself, and from that wound came something the galaxy had never seen before. The human fleet burst out of hyperspace in a blaze of twisted metal and sparking electronics. Their ships looked like they had been through a hurricane made of lightning, hull plating buckled, paint scorched off, sensor arrays hanging by cables, but every single weapon system was online and ready for war. War leader, Krexith, stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The readings showed ships that should have been floating scrap metal, yet they were moving in perfect formation. These vessels had somehow survived a journey that should have killed everyone aboard 3 times over. Impossible, he whispered. No species can survive hyperspace trauma of that magnitude. His answer came in the form of a transmission that cut through every frequency in the system like a knife through silk. Admiral Mitchell's voice was calm, cold, and absolutely terrifying in its quiet confidence. This is the 3rd human fleet. You picked the wrong species to mess with. The Vorth had terrorized the galaxy for generations. They were 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor, and strong enough to tear steel with their bare hands. Their ships were mobile fortresses built for extended sieges and overwhelming firepower. They had never lost a major engagement in over 200 years of conquest. None of that mattered. Now, what happened next would be talked about in military academies for the next 1,000 years, instead of the careful, long-range battles that civilized species conducted, ships firing from safe distances, slowly wearing down enemy shields over hours or days. The humans did something that broke every rule of space combat ever written. They charged. 50 human warships accelerated directly toward the Vorth fleet, like ancient knights riding into battle. No formation, no careful tactics, no regard for their own safety. They just pointed their ships at the enemy and pushed their engines to maximum power. Captain Robert Kane commanded the destroyer U.S. Hammer, a ship that had seen more battles than most veterans. His crew was young, barely out of training, but they had something the Vorth couldn't understand: complete faith that their captain would get them home. "Sir, we're approaching optimal firing range," his weapons officer called out. "Not close enough," Kane replied, his eyes locked on the massive Vorth cruiser directly ahead. "Keep going." "Sir, at this range, their shields will. I don't want to fight their shields. I want to fight them." The Hammer continued its insane charge until something incredible happened. The destroyer got so close to the Vorth cruiser that their shields actually began to overlap, creating a crackling field of energy between the 2 vessels. Both ships were now inside each other's defensive perimeter. "All batteries, point-blank range." Kane roared into his communicator. "Show them how we do things in the Sol system." Every weapon on the Hammer fired at once: plasma cannons, railguns, missile tubes, even the small defensive turrets. All of them poured their fury directly into the Vorth ship's hull. At that range, shields were useless. Armor plating meant nothing. The concentrated fire tore through the enemy cruiser like paper. The Vorth ship staggered under the assault, its hull buckling and atmosphere venting into space. But Kane wasn't finished. What he did next would be remembered as either the most brilliant tactical maneuver in military history or the most insane. He rammed his destroyer directly into the Vorth cruiser's engine section. The impact sent both ships spinning through space like broken toys. Metal screamed against metal. Hull plates tore away. The 2 vessels became locked together in a deadly embrace, their crews suddenly facing each other across a maze of twisted wreckage. This was where the real battle began. Major Patricia Walsh had been waiting for this moment her entire career. She led the first wave of Marines through the breach, moving through the wreckage like she had been born in zero gravity. Her mag boots clanked against twisted hull plates as she navigated between floating debris and sparking electrical systems. Behind her came 40 of the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced. These weren't the careful, methodical troops that other species fielded. These were humans who treated vacuum exposure like a minor inconvenience and saw explosive decompression as just another tactical challenge. The Vorth were waiting for them, but they had never fought anything like this before. Most species avoided boarding actions because they were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Humans actively sought them out because they were too dangerous and unpredictable for anyone else to handle. "Remember your training," Walsh shouted into her comm as her squad spread out through the enemy ship. "Vacuum is your friend. Use their atmosphere against them." What followed was a running gunfight through the corridors of the Vorth cruiser. But this wasn't like battles in movies, where everyone stood in the open trading shots. This was three-dimensional combat in a gravity-free environment, filled with floating debris and deadly hazards. The humans moved like dolphins through water, using the ship's own structure as cover and concealment. When the Vorth tried to retreat to pressurized sections, the humans simply cut holes in the hull and let vacuum do the work for them. When the Vorth attempted to use their superior size and strength, the humans used their superior agility and creativity. Sergeant Danny Torres found himself face to face with a Vorth warrior twice his size in a narrow corridor. Instead of trying to match strength with strength, he did something that surprised everyone. He turned off his mag boots and let himself float backward while firing. The Vorth, built for ground combat, couldn't adapt to the sudden change in momentum and crashed into a bulkhead. "Mitchell's right," Walsh muttered as she watched her Marines systematically take apart one of the galaxy's most feared species. "We really are crazy enough to make this work." All around them, the battle raged as other human ships executed similarly impossible maneuvers. The UES Wolverine used its damaged engine core as an improvised weapon, ramming a Vorth battleship and then detonating the core in a controlled explosion that crippled both vessels. The UES Thunder performed a maneuver that involved flying upside down through a debris field while firing backwards at pursuing enemies. The Vorth, masters of conventional warfare, found themselves completely outmatched by opponents who refused to fight conventionally. These humans treated space combat like it was some kind of extreme sport, taking risks that should have gotten them all killed but somehow worked perfectly. Warleader Krexith watched his mighty fleet being torn apart by ships that looked like flying scrap piles. His tactical display showed patterns of combat that made no sense, maneuvers that violated every principle of space warfare he had ever learned. "They're completely insane," his second-in-command whispered. "Yes," Krexith replied, his voice filled with something he had never felt before: respect for an enemy. "And that's exactly why they're winning." The space around the Caldari colony had become a swirling chaos of explosions, laser fire, and spinning wreckage. Ships twisted through 3 dimensions in patterns that would have made experienced pilots sick just watching. But in the middle of this madness, Commander David Nelson was somehow keeping track of everything at once. His command center aboard the UES Defiant looked like the nerve center of a hurricane. Dozens of screens showed different parts of the battle space combat: above ground, fighting on the planet's surface, evacuation routes through the colony's cities. Nelson stood in the center of it all, making split-second decisions that would determine who lived and who died. "Orbital strike confirmed on Grid 77 Alpha," he called out, while simultaneously reviewing evacuation reports on another screen. "Vorth ground forces neutralized. Evac Team 3, you're clear to proceed." His staff watched in amazement as their commander juggled a dozen critical operations without missing a beat. This was human multitasking at its finest, the ability to fight a war on multiple fronts while never losing sight of the bigger picture. "Sir, Evac Ship Phoenix is taking heavy fire on approach Vector 7. reported Colonel Jennifer Hayes from her command post down on the planet. Her voice was steady, despite the explosions echoing in the background. They're carrying 2,000 Caldari children. If we lose that ship, ... Double quotes. Nelson didn't need to hear the rest. His fingers flew across his console, pulling up tactical displays of the atmosphere around the landing zone. The Phoenix was a converted cargo hauler, tough but slow, packed with terrified alien families who had never seen war before. Hayes, redirect Falcon and Eagle squadrons to provide cover, he ordered. Full escort pattern, maximum aggressive posture. Sir, that pulls our fighters away from the orbital battle. If the Vorth break through our defensive line, they won't, Nelson said with quiet confidence. Our people up here can handle themselves. Those kids down there need us more. This was the moment that separated humans from every other species in the galaxy. When forced to choose between tactical advantage and protecting innocence, humans chose protection every single time. It wasn't strategy, it was who they were. Colonel Hayes felt her chest tighten with pride as she watched 2 full squadrons of human fighters peel away from the space battle to escort a single evacuation ship. These pilots were abandoning relative safety to fly through a war zone, all to save alien children they had never met. Down on the surface, the war was even more personal. Sergeant Michael Torres crouched behind a collapsed building with his squad, watching thousands of Caldari civilians stream past toward the evacuation zones. The aliens looked like walking flowers, tall, graceful, with skin that shifted through rainbow colors when they were scared. Right now, every single one of them was showing deep purple terror. Sarge, we've got Vorth ground troops moving in. From the east, called out Corporal Betty Kim, her rifle trained on the horizon. Looks like a full company, maybe more. Torres checked his ammunition counter and felt his stomach drop. They had maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire left between the 4 of them. After that, it would come down to bayonets and determination. Here's the plan, he told his squad. We hold this position until every last civilian is through that checkpoint. No retreat, no surrender, no exceptions. What if we run out of ammo? Asked Private Jake Wilson, barely 18 years old and 3 months out of basic training. Torres smiled grimly and pulled out his combat knife, checking the edge. Then, we get creative. The Vorth attack came like a tidal wave of armor and fury. These weren't the ship-based warriors they had been fighting in space. These were Vorth ground specialists, built like walking tanks and trained for planetary conquest. Each one stood over 8 feet tall, armed with weapons that could punch through concrete. Torres and his squad met them with everything they had. Plasma rifle fire lit up the ruins as the humans poured concentrated fire into the advancing enemy. But there were too many Vorth and too few bullets. When his rifle finally clicked empty, Torres did exactly what he had promised. He fixed his bayonet and prepared to fight with steel and courage. Behind him, the last group of Caldari civilians was almost through the checkpoint. Alien families carrying their children, their elderly, their precious belongings from lives that were about to change forever. The bayonet lasted exactly 37 seconds before a Vorth warrior's massive claws shattered it like glass. Torres didn't hesitate. He dropped the broken weapon and raised his fists, meeting an 8-foot alien war machine with nothing but human determination and 200 pounds of pure, stubborn refusal to give up. The Caldari refugees stopped running to watch this impossible sight. A human soldier, barely 6 feet tall, trading blows with a creature that could have torn apart a ground vehicle. He was losing, everyone could see that, but he wasn't backing down. Every punch he landed bought them another few seconds to escape. Why doesn't he run? Asked the young Caldari, her voice filled with wonder. Because he's human? Replied her mother, tears streaming down her rainbow-colored face. They don't know how to run when others need them. High above them, Captain Amanda Foster was having her own impossible battle. Her fighter squadron had engaged Vorth atmospheric craft in a running dogfight through the planet's upper atmosphere. This wasn't the clean, predictable combat of deep space. This was flying through air thick enough to slow you down, and gravity strong enough to kill you if you made a mistake. Foster to all. Hawk fighters. She called over the radio while pulling her ship through a turn that would have liquefied anyone who wasn't human. Use their size against them. These Vorth ships are built for space, not atmosphere. Make them chase us where they don't want to go. She dove toward the planet's surface at a speed that set her hull plating glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Behind her, a massive Vorth fighter tried to follow, its pilot confident that no prey could escape their superior firepower. Foster smiled as she felt her ship shudder from the heat. This was what humans did best. Turn their environment into a weapon. At the last possible second, she pulled out of the dive and skimmed along the planet's surface, using valleys and mountain ranges as cover, while her pursuer struggled to match her maneuvers in the thicker air. The Vorth ship, built for the vacuum of space, couldn't handle the stress. Its engines overheated. Its control surfaces, designed for zero-G maneuvering, couldn't cope with atmospheric pressure. It crashed into a mountainside in a spectacular fireball, while Foster's fighter danced away unharmed. "That's how we do it back home," she muttered, already lining up her next target. All across the battlefield. Similar scenes played out as humans did what they had always done best, turned impossible situations into victories through sheer, bloody-minded determination. They fought like the universe itself depended on their success, because for the Caldari civilians, cowering in bunkers and evacuation ships, it really did. The tide was turning, but the cost was measured in human blood and broken ships. Every victory came at a price, and every human in the fleet was willing to pay it. They had come to save a species they had never met, and they would see the job finished no matter what it cost them. The galaxy was learning what humans had always known. Sometimes the only way to win is to care more about victory than you care about survival. The silence that followed the last explosion was almost more unsettling than the battle itself had been. For 12 hours, space around the Caldari colony had been filled with the thunder of weapons fire, the screams of dying ships, and the desperate voices of people fighting for their lives. Now there was only the quiet hiss of escaping atmosphere and the gentle drift of cooling wreckage. Admiral Mitchell stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, staring out through the cracked viewport at what remained of the once mighty Vorth fleet. Twisted chunks of metal floated past like mechanical tombstones, their hulls still glowing red from the heat of battle. Here and there, escape pods drifted away from the carnage, carrying the few Vorth survivors who had chosen flight over a warrior's death. The galaxy's most feared predator species had been broken in a single engagement. Ships that had terrorized civilizations for centuries were now nothing more than scrap metal and bad memories. The Vorth who had escaped would carry word of this defeat to every corner of the galaxy. The humans had arrived, and everything had changed. But victory had come at a price that made Mitchell's chest tight with grief. Nearly half his fleet was damaged beyond immediate repair. The UES Wolverine was held together by emergency patches and prayer. The destroyer Hammer was fused to the Vorth cruiser it had rammed, both ships slowly spinning through space in their final embrace. Casualty reports filled dozens of screens, each name representing someone who had volunteered to serve at the galaxy's edge, protecting species that had once feared them. Mitchell's own uniform was torn and stained with smoke. A piece of shrapnel had carved a line across his forehead during the worst of the fighting. His ship was held together by emergency patches, backup systems, and the sheer stubborn refusal of his crew to let her die. But his eyes held something that made the cost worthwhile: quiet satisfaction. They had done the impossible. They had saved an entire civilization. The communication alert chimed softly, cutting through the bridge's somber atmosphere. Mitchell almost smiled when he saw the origin code: the Galactic Council headquarters. The same organization that had banished humanity to the Outer Rim 50 years ago. Fleet Admiral Trelak's image flickered to life on the main screen. His silver scales dulled with exhaustion, but his forearms held in a gesture that humans would recognize as profound respect. Behind him, the council chamber was filled with representatives from 200 species, all of them staring at the transmission with expressions of awe and gratitude. Admiral Mitchell Trelak began, his voice carrying the weight of history. The council has convened an emergency session. We have voted unanimously on a matter of unprecedented importance. Mitchell waited, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Around him, his bridge crew stopped their repair work to listen. Even Lieutenant Commander Brooks, now sporting a bandaged arm and exhaustion lines around her eyes, looked up from her damage reports. We formally request the establishment of permanent human naval bases throughout Council space, Trelak continued. Your species' methods may be ... unconventional, but they are undeniably effective. We were wrong to fear you. We were wrong to exile you to the Rim. Today, you have proven that humanity belongs not at the edge of civilization, but at its heart. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galaxy had believed for half a century. The same council that had once declared humans too dangerous for civilized space was now begging them to take responsibility for protecting that space. Brooks let out a tired laugh, shaking her head in amazement. So we've gone from galactic outcasts to galactic protectors in one day. Mitchell nodded slowly, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. Seems like it, Brooks. The galaxy finally figured out that sometimes you need a little controlled chaos to keep the real monsters at bay. Through the viewport, he could see other human ships taking up positions around the rescued colony. The UES Thunder, her hull scarred, but her weapons still operational, moved into orbit alongside Caldari defense platforms that had been built for peace, not war. The destroyer, Phoenix, still carrying evacuated civilians in her cargo holds, accepted docking clearance from alien traffic controllers who had never imagined they would be working with human vessels. For the first time in decades, human ships were operating in the heart of civilized space, not as invaders or threats, but as protectors. The sight made something deep in Mitchell's chest unclench, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for 50 years. On the planet below, Caldari families were emerging from their shelters to find their world still intact, their children still alive, their future still possible. Human Marines were helping with reconstruction efforts, their powered armor making light work of clearing debris that would have taken the delicate aliens weeks to move. The same soldiers who had fought like demons just hours before were now gently helping elderly Caldari to safety, their movements careful and precise around beings so much more fragile than themselves. Sergeant Torres, his face bandaged but his spirit unbroken, stood in the main refugee center surrounded by young Caldari who had never seen a human before. They clustered around him like flowers drawn to sunlight, their skin shifting through grateful shades of blue and gold as he told them stories about Earth, the dangerous, wonderful world that had forged humanity into what they were. Are all humans like you? Asked a small Caldari child, her voice filled with wonder. Torres smiled, remembering every person who had volunteered for this mission, despite knowing they might never come home. Kid, we're all a little crazy. That's what makes us human. The message was spreading across the galaxy faster than light itself. The Vorth horde, unstoppable for generations, had been shattered by a species that the civilized galaxy had tried to ignore. Humanity wasn't just dangerous. They were dangerous in service of something greater than themselves. Admiral Mitchell accepted the Council's offer with the gravity it deserved, knowing that everything was about to change. Human bases would spring up throughout Council space, staffed by volunteers who understood that their job was to stand between civilization and the darkness. They would be the guardians that other species couldn't be. The monsters who chose to protect, rather than destroy, as the first joint. Human-alien patrol began forming up around the Caldari colony. Mitchell reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. 50 years ago, humanity had been exiled for being too violent, too unpredictable, too willing to fight. Now they were being welcomed back for exactly the same reasons. The galaxy was finally learning what humans had always known. Sometimes, the scariest monsters make the best guardians. Sometimes the people willing to walk into hell are the only ones capable of keeping it from spreading. In the end, humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their tactics. It was their willingness to sacrifice everything for people they had never met, to fight impossible odds for causes that weren't their own, to stand guard in the darkness so others could sleep safely in the light. The Deathworlders had come home, at last, not as conquerors, but as the protectors they had always been meant to be.